there's a strange silence that follows a megastar's collapse. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that comes with explosions or scandal. It's quieter than that. It's the silence of people scrolling past, of playlists not updated, of timelines moving on while one man keeps screaming into the void. And that's the silence that's currently swallowing Aubrey Graham whole. Because somewhere between the ice sculptures melting in downtown Toronto and the third album loading on Spotify at midnight, something inside the Drake universe cracked. And once you notice that crack, you can't unsee it. You watch the reactions, you read the reviews, you scroll through the comment sections, and a single, brutal truth keeps surfacing like a body refusing to stay buried. The mask has slipped. And what's underneath isn't a king. It's a brand running out of road. Let me set the scene for you, because the absurdity of this moment deserves to be painted in detail. One of the most commercially dominant artists alive walks into the studio with 2 years to cook. 2 full years. He has every producer on speed dial, every engineer at his beck and call, every favor in the industry waiting to be cashed in. And what does he deliver? Not 1 album. Not 2. 3. 3 entire projects dropped onto the world in the same night, like he was trying to drown the conversation before anyone could even take a breath. Iceman, Habibi, Maid of Honor, 43 tracks, nearly 3 hours of audio, a sonic flood designed to overwhelm, to dominate, to bury every critic and every rival under sheer volume. And in any other era, that strategy might have worked. But this isn't any other era. The audience has changed. The audience is awake now. And the audience is laughing. Because the second those albums hit, the verdict came in faster than the streams could even register. Not a slow burn of disappointment. Not a gradual cooling off. A unanimous, almost organized digital roast that felt like the entire internet had been holding its breath, waiting for the chance to finally say what it had been thinking for years. Review aggregators lit up red. Comment sections turned into open graves. People weren't just calling the music mid. They were calling it embarrassing. Bottom 3 Drake. Worst album of all time. Throwaways disguised as a trilogy. And the most damning phrase of all kept repeating across every platform like a chant. No replay value. You understand what that means in 2026. In an industry that runs on streams, on rewinds, on the loop, no replay value isn't criticism. It's a death certificate. And here's where the story gets darker. Because the fans, the loyal ones, the lifers, the ones with OVO tattoos and Drake's face on their bathroom doors, they tried to defend it. They came out swinging the way they always do. They flooded the timelines. They quoted streaming counts. They screamed about numbers. And the moment they started screaming about numbers, every observer with a brain knew exactly what was happening. When the music can't speak for itself, the fans start talking like accountants. That's the tell. That's always the tell. You don't hear people defending a classic by pulling up a Spotify dashboard. You hear them quoting bars. You hear them screaming lyrics. You hear them crying about a verse that hit them at 3 a.m. But this time, nothing. Just spreadsheets. Just charts. Just a panic dressed up as confidence. And then came the reactions that made the whole thing impossible to ignore. Streamers, podcasters, casual listeners, even longtime supporters, all delivering the same verdict in slightly different words. One commentator put it simply, "This is why people can't take this stuff seriously anymore." Another broke down a single bar where Drake compared his spending habits to being Middle Eastern and racking up tabs at Chanel, and the laughter wasn't even cruel. It was disbelieving. The kind of laughter that comes when a magician's trick fails in front of a packed audience. People weren't mocking him out of hate. They were mocking him out of genuine secondhand embarrassment. And there's no recovery from that. Hate, you can fight. Embarrassment is forever. Now here's the part the algorithm doesn't want you to think about. The part that goes deeper than memes and tweets. Drake didn't just release 3-week albums. He released 3-week albums after spending 2 years allegedly preparing a response to the man who humiliated him on a global stage. 2 years. And what came out wasn't a counterattack. It wasn't a comeback. It was a tantrum stretched across 43 tracks. A man arguing with internet strangers over symphonic production. A grown adult dedicating an entire creative cycle to rebutting comments he could have simply ignored. And every second of it confirmed the very accusations he was trying to dismantle. Because nothing screams guilt louder than a defense that won't shut up. Think about that for a moment. 2 years of his life. 2 years of studio time. 2 years of feature negotiations. 2 years of marketing planning. 2 years of cultural anticipation. And the final product is a man whining into a microphone about how everyone betrayed him. His label, his peers, his collaborators, even people he hasn't spoken to in a decade. The album's sleeve might as well have been a list of grievances stapled to a billboard. And the worst part? He didn't even diss the one person who arguably started the whole avalanche. Future. The same Future who opened a verse on a song that lit the fuse for the entire feud. The same Future who walked away clean while everyone else got buried in bars.
Why?
Because Drake needed him. He needed the Atlanta cosign. He needed the credibility. He needed the bag. And in meeting him, he revealed everything. That's the contradiction nobody can unsee now. Drake's willing to attack Jay-Z for hosting a halftime show. He's willing to swing at LeBron, at Lamar, at executives, at engineers, at producers, at random rappers who haven't even been relevant in years. He's willing to fight everyone except the person whose verse actually started this. And the moment people noticed that, the whole tough guy posture collapsed. Because a man only handpicks his enemies based on convenience when he was never really fighting for principle in the first place. He was fighting for optics. And optics, once exposed, lose all their magic. Let's slow down and look at Iceman because honestly, that's the only one of the three that even pretends to be a real album. The intro track, Make Them Cry, is genuinely strong. For about 3 minutes, you hear a version of Drake the world hasn't seen in years. A man talking about his father's cancer. A man wrestling with betrayal. A man admitting his age is catching up. It's vulnerable. It's textured. It's human. And then, like clockwork, the curtain falls. He vanishes. And what replaces him is the same character he's been playing for the past 7 years. Just louder this time.
Sassier.
More sarcastic. More committed to the bit. As if the moment he caught a glimpse of his real self, he flinched and ran the other way. That's the tragedy of modern Drake. He shows you he can still do it. And then he refuses to. The deeper you go into the album, the more obvious the pattern becomes. He's no longer writing songs. He's writing rebuttals. Every track feels like a reply tweet stretched into 4 minutes. Every bar feels engineered to win an argument rather than tell a story. And in trying to win every argument, he loses the one thing music actually needs. Connection. The listener doesn't care who hurt you. The listener cares whether the song hits. And these songs don't hit. They hover. They float around the room like cold air. Beautiful production. Sleek mixing. Polished vocals. But emotionally? Hollow. A luxury car with no engine. A diamond necklace on a mannequin. And then there's the Habibi situation, which honestly feels like a fever dream more than an album. People keep trying to find meaning in it and coming up empty. The features feel random. The tracklist feels like leftovers. The energy feels like a contractual obligation rather than an artistic statement. And the title alone has already become a joke that won't die. Listeners are quoting it back the way you quote a meme, not a masterpiece. And that's a brutal place for any artist to land, let alone one of the biggest of his generation. When your project becomes punchline material before the first weekend ends, the cultural verdict is already in. The streams might roll in for a few weeks, but the conversation is already over. Maid of Honor might be the strangest of the three, and not in a charming way. Strange in the way a dream you don't want to remember is strange. The crying, the singing, the whining, the recycled emotional confessions that no longer feel like confessions because we've heard them 17 times across 17 projects. A man pushing 40 asking the same questions a man pushing 25 asked. No evolution. No new wounds. No new questions. Just the same sandcastle being rebuilt with different colored shovels. And the audience can feel it. They've stopped pretending. They've stopped lying for him. They're saying what they should have said years ago. We want more. But here's the bigger conversation because this isn't just about one bad night. This is about a slow-motion identity crisis playing out in real time. Drake, at this stage of his career, is no longer an artist. He's an executive disguised as an artist. He's a brand running a music division. And brands do not evolve. Brands optimize. Brands maintain. Brands release limited editions and surprise drops. Brands hire focus groups and dictate algorithms. And that's why every Drake album for the past 5 years has felt like it was assembled rather than created. Like he scanned the streets, picked up the latest cadence, the latest slang, the latest viral inflection, and stapled it onto his own voice. He doesn't make music anymore. He audits it. Watch his interviews. Watch his interactions. Watch how he absorbs accents. Watch how he picks up the cadences of whoever he's around. One year, he's borrowing flows from Memphis rappers. The next year, it's UK drill. Then it's Latin trap. Then it's New York drill. Then it's Atlanta sing rap. He's not adapting. He's mimicking. He's an emotional sponge dressed like a chameleon. And for years, the world called it genius. They said, look at his range. Look at his global reach. Look at how he understands every culture. But understanding and absorbing are the same thing. One requires immersion. The other only requires observation. And the audience finally figured out the difference. Compare him for a second to the artists he tries to be measured against, and the picture gets uncomfortable real fast. Kendrick took his pain and built mythology from it. The Weeknd transformed heartbreak into cinema. Cole turned doubt into discipline. Even artists outside his lane have evolved publicly, painfully, beautifully. And what has Drake done in that same window? He's perfected the formula. He's mastered the brand. He's made the same album 6 different times in 6 different costumes. There's nothing wrong with consistency. But consistency without growth is just stagnation in a nicer outfit. And eventually, even the most loyal audience starts noticing the wallpaper hasn't changed. You know what gives the whole situation away? The way his most loyal fans defend him. Not with passion. Not with quotes. Not with verses that gave them goosebumps. They defend him with numbers. They quote Spotify totals like stock prices. They scream about chart positions like they're shareholders, not listeners. And the moment a fanbase starts behaving like a board of directors, the music has already lost. Because real music never needs a sales report to justify itself. A real classic survives the silence. It survives the hate. It survives the decades. But these albums? They can't survive the Weeknd. There was even a moment when Spotify quietly corrected Drake's streaming numbers after accidentally bundling streams from multiple tracks together. A clerical mistake. A computational hiccup. But the reaction online told you everything. Half the fanbase didn't care that the music was being torn apart. They cared that the numbers got smaller. They mourned the inflation, not the art. And that single reaction exposes the entire ecosystem that Drake helped build. A fanbase that loves him for being big, not for being good. Because the bigness was always the product. The music was just the rapper. And then comes the most uncomfortable layer of all. The political one. The cultural one. The one nobody wants to touch, but everyone notices. Iceman tracks started appearing on official White House social media posts. Tracks soundtracking footage of arrests, of crackdowns, of state-led optics designed to flex authority. And Drake said nothing. Not a tweet. Not a comment. Not a single distancing statement. For an artist who built half his empire on borrowed Black American culture, the silence wasn't just loud. It was deafening. It told you exactly where his priorities lie. Not with the culture that raised him commercially, but with the brand that pays him eternally. That silence is the real story underneath the trilogy. Because an artist's choices, including the choices they refuse to make, define their legacy more than any verse. And Drake at this stage of his career keeps choosing optimization over conviction, optics over honesty, brand safety over artistic risk. And while that strategy made him the most commercially successful rapper of his generation, it's also the reason he's currently watching his cultural relevance evaporate one comment section at a time. You can't buy your way back into a culture you stopped serving. You can't stream your way back into respect. You either earn it again, or you watch it become a memory. And listen, none of this means he can't rap. None of this means he doesn't have talent. There's a reason this man dominated the 2010s. There's a reason he became the blueprint for melodic rap. There's a reason he holds records nobody else can touch. But talent isn't permanence. Talent without evolution becomes a museum exhibit. People walk past it. They take a picture. They move on. And right now, the world is walking past Drake faster than he can keep up with. His audience isn't smaller. It's just less interested. And that distinction is everything. The conference call rumor is what made the whole situation darker. The idea that an OVO inner circle meeting had to happen because the project was tanking publicly. Whether the meeting was literal or symbolic, the energy it represents is unmistakable. Damage control. Containment. Strategy sessions to spin a narrative that the music should have spun on its own. And anytime a creative team has to gather to defend the art rather than let the art breathe, the verdict has already been written. Because true classics don't need committee meetings. They don't need press cycles. They don't need rapid response squads. They just need ears. And ears have stopped opening. You want to know what really broke the illusion this time? It wasn't the bars. It wasn't even the lyrics about flying somebody to the moon, or singing about Chanel tabs, or comparing himself to a Middle Eastern shopper in a way that made an entire timeline groan. It was the desperation underneath all of it. The way every track screamed for attention. The way every lyric reached for relevance. The way every diss tried to recapture a moment that had already passed. There's a specific kind of energy a man gives off when he knows the moment has slipped through his fingers and he's trying to grab it back before anyone notices. That energy is the fingerprint left all over these 3 albums. Even the people who tried to like it can't fake it anymore. Listen to the streamers. Listen to the longtime fans. Listen to the casual listeners who used to defend him in every group chat. They're all saying the same thing now. They wanted to love it. They tried to love it. They played it twice, 3 times, 4 times, hoping the magic would hit. And it didn't. Some of them couldn't even make it past track 7. Others described it as a slow death. Others said the production was solid but the substance was hollow. The most damning reviews aren't the ones from haters. They're the ones from fans pretending not to be heartbroken. That's the sound of a kingdom losing its crown without realizing the coronation already ended. And the comparisons people keep making are the cruelest part. Not because they're unfair, but because they're accurate. They're calling the rollout a Temu version of an album drop. They're saying it'll be forgotten in a year, while Kendrick's tracks will be quoted until the sun explodes. They're saying Drake makes music for people who sigh until you ask them what's wrong. These aren't insults pulled out of thin air. These are observations sharpened by years of watching the same patterns repeat. Years of watching a man with infinite resources refuse to use them on growth. And when the public finally pulls back the curtain, they don't pull back gently. They yank it. But here's what's truly fascinating about this moment in his career. Drake still has every tool he ever had. The voice, the cadence, the ear, the team, the budget, the reach. Nothing has been taken from him. No tragedy has shrunk his platform. No scandal has stolen his microphone. The only thing that's changed is the audience. They've evolved. They've gotten sharper. They've gotten less forgiving. They've gotten tired of the same loop. And the irony is suffocating, because the man who built his career on understanding the audience better than any artist alive is now the man being left behind by it. So where does this leave him? That's the real question. Because 3 failed albums aren't a death sentence. Plenty of icons have stumbled before bouncing back. But the bounce back requires honesty. It requires a willingness to look in the mirror without flinching. And nothing in the past 3 years suggests Drake is willing to do that. He's surrounded by enablers. He's protected by yes men. He's insulated by streaming dollars and superfan armies that confuse defending him with helping him. And without honest pressure, no artist evolves. Without honest pressure, they just decay slowly under the weight of their own legend. The deeper irony is that the world isn't even asking him to be perfect. They're asking him to be real. To stop performing wounds and start showing them. To stop assembling music and start creating it. To stop chasing relevance and start meaning something again. That's the door he keeps refusing to walk through. And every time he refuses, the room gets a little emptier. The applause gets a little quieter. The next album starts with a little less goodwill. Until one day, the door doesn't even exist anymore. That's how legacies die. Not in scandals. In silences. There's a question buried inside this whole saga that nobody really wants to ask out loud. What if Drake actually knows? What if the man who built an empire on understanding emotional currents knows exactly what the audience is feeling and simply doesn't have the courage to deliver what they're asking for? Because vulnerability isn't an aesthetic. It's a wound. And wounds, once shown, can't be taken back. They live in the public record forever. And maybe that's the line he refuses to cross. Maybe that's the cost he isn't willing to pay. He'd rather be mocked for being shallow than risk being mocked for being honest. And in choosing that, he chose his own ceiling. Step back for a second and look at the larger picture. This isn't just one bad album cycle. This is the slow exposure of a model. A model where an artist can release massive amounts of music, dominate the charts, command the algorithm, and still feel artistically invisible. A model where commercial success and creative weight are no longer the same currency. A model that worked for a decade and is now, finally, beginning to crumble under the weight of its own emptiness. And Drake is the first major casualty of that shift. Not because he's the worst, because he's the biggest. And when the biggest brand starts shaking, the entire system begins to wobble. There's something almost cinematic about watching it happen. The ice sculptures in his own city, melting on schedule. The hashtags trending against him in real time. The interviews resurfacing where he refused to answer questions about artistic growth, dismissing them with sarcasm, brushing past them with brand-safe deflections. All of it now reads like foreshadowing. Like the universe gave him chance after chance to evolve, and he kept walking past the door. And now the moment has arrived, and the door has closed. And outside that door, the rest of music is moving on without him. You can hear the shift even in the way new listeners talk about him. They don't talk about him with the reverence reserved for legends. They talk about him with the slight detachment reserved for old, reliable products. Like he's the iPhone of rap. Functional, familiar, predictable, not exciting, not dangerous, not necessary, just there. And that's the most expensive critique a once untouchable artist can receive. Because once you become predictable in a culture built on disruption, you're already halfway out the door. The audience doesn't need you anymore. They just remember you. But maybe, and this is the part that makes the story worth telling, this collapse is exactly what he needs. Maybe 3 failed albums in one night is the universe slamming the brakes on a creative life that drifted too far from the road. Maybe the embarrassment is the medicine. Maybe the laughter is the lesson. Because nothing forces an artist to look inward like a public stripping. And if Drake ever decides to use this moment, to actually use it instead of running from it, the next chapter could be the most interesting of his entire career. Not because it would beat the numbers, but because it might finally beat the silence. Whether he takes that path is anyone's guess. The pattern says no. The history says no. The team around him says no. But the audience is still there, quietly waiting. Not for another 43-track avalanche. Not for another emotional tantrum disguised as confidence. They're waiting for a man. A real one. The one we saw for 3 minutes on Make Them Cry before he ran back behind the mask. That man is still in there somewhere. The question is whether he'll ever be brave enough to step forward again. Because at the end of all this, beyond the memes, beyond the streams, beyond the rollout, beyond the conference calls and the comment sections and the late-night reactions, what we're really watching is a story as old as fame itself. A man who became too big to fail and, in becoming too big to fail, slowly stopped trying to win. He didn't lose his talent. He lost his hunger. And the audience can always tell the difference. Always. They might not be able to articulate it. They might not have the vocabulary. But their playlists know. Their replays know. Their silences know. And, right now, every silence around Drake is screaming. So here we are. 3 albums later. 43 tracks deeper. 2 years of anticipation reduced to 1 night of disappointment. And somewhere in Toronto, the ice that once spelled his name has long since melted into the pavement. A perfect, almost poetic ending for a rollout that promised dominance and delivered detachment. The throne isn't gone. Nobody took it from him. He just kept sitting on it without sharpening the sword. And eventually the kingdom noticed. Eventually, the kingdom always notices. Because in music, like in life, you don't lose your crown in a single battle. You lose it in the quiet moments when you stop fighting for it. And the quiet around Drake right now isn't peace. It's the sound of a culture moving on. And whether he hears it or not, that sound is the loudest thing he's ever produced.